I know this is a pretty busy slide, but basically the bars are color-coded from 2005 to 2009, and they represent, based on the systems at the bottom, the amount of irrigation water that was applied that particular year. The white bar that's inserted inside the color graph gives us the range from low to high of how much water was actually applied. For example, if we look at 2006 on cotton, we had a low of about 6 inches and a high up to 21 or 22 inches. What we have seen in the demonstration project, and I made the comment earlier that each year we've seen an increase in the number of acres that have added drip. We believe that there's kind of a learning curve. If a producer has not had any experience with drip irrigation and had more water than what they actually needed for a drip system on that particular site, we see a tendency initially for them to possibly over-irrigate with drip until they start to learn, because it's so easy and we can't visually see what we're doing, but we do know that when we take a drip system and we can wet to the surface and cause moss to grow, that we're probably over-irrigating that particular crop. And we've actually seen that. But then once the guys start to kind of understand what they're doing, then we see them doing a real good job with drip, both corn and cotton. And as far as our drip sites go, we have drip irrigation on 80-inch centers, 40-inch centers, and we actually have one site that has drip on 30-inch centers. But you can look at the extreme ranges, and then if you think back about weather conditions over that 5-year period, we've got some real extremes. 2005 was an excellent growing season. We had 15 inches of rainfall in that area average in 2005. 2006 was rough as a cob. It was very dry. We actually got 15.4 inches in 2006. It just didn't rain during the growing season. We had one single rainfall event the very last day of August and first couple of days of September that was 5 inches of that 15.4 inch total. So it's not always how much it rains, it's when you have the opportunity to get that rainfall event. All right, we're talking about extremes, and these are examples, and we're not necessarily pointing the finger at anybody, but what it tells us is we believe every producer involved in this project are good producers. But when we look at, again, gross margin versus net return, we can see a situation where we had a grower that put on about 12 inches of irrigation and was able to, on cotton, was able to gross about $650 an acre. Another example of a grower that actually put on 17, 18 inches of irrigation water and grossed less money. One of the things that Dr. Stephen Close with Texas A&M University is in charge of the Farm Assistance Program told me at the very beginning of this demonstration project was that based on the information that they had been able to gather with the farm assistance numbers, and I think that program started in 1995, but I stand to be corrected, was very rarely, if ever, did maximum yield equate to maximum net return per acre. It was something less than that. So if we're trying to manage our farming operations for maximum yield, that means probably that the inputs that we have some control over, whether it be water, fertility, or a combination of both, we're probably overdoing some of that. And that takes away from our net return. Even though we may get the yield, that extra yield may only barely be paying for the other inputs that we're adding to try to maximize that yield. Corn the same way. We had a producer that actually didn't put on but about 10 inches and grossed 375 an acre. Conversely, we had a grower that put on 25 inches but was able to gross $850 per acre on corn. I won't go through each one of these individually, but you can kind of see the extremes and ranges that we have based on the different systems. Okay, we looked at it another way. Looked at irrigation across the bottom, gross margin on the left-hand scale. Over the first 5 years of the demonstration project, regardless of the delivery method, whether it be pivot, furrow, or drip irrigation, on cotton, when we got much above 15 inches, we got to the point of diminishing returns. That line started to flatten out. So even though we might increase yield a little bit, is it paying for the extra water that we're putting on? When we look at integrated crop livestock systems, we see the same shape to that curve, but it's at a lower water rate. When we get much over about 10 inches, that curve starts to flatten and then it will decline. Multi-crop, again, remember that most of the multi-crop systems have some type of grain involved. I know I'm the only thing between y'all and lunch, so I will be on time. Corn, more water we put on, more gross margin that we're seeing. Some of the other things we're doing as far as measuring crop water use, this is a mobile eddy covariance system. Dr. Stephen Moss with USDA and Texas Tech is involved in the project, and what he's actually doing is putting this equipment in the field where he can measure real-time ET and at the same time carbon sequestration, and he's trying to use that information then to ground truth his aerial photography and satellite imagery to hopefully at some point in time maybe be able to use this technology from an irrigation scheduling standpoint. Okay, we're working on an economic model too, and this was basically asked for by our producers, and we're not near as far along as y'all are at K-State. Dr. Justin Weinheimer is working with us on this and along the same lines that you're doing, Norm, where a grower would take a system, let's say a circle, and he would say, I want to plant 60 acres of corn and 60 acres of cotton. Here's how much water I have available for this system. This is what my cost of production is, and this is what my cost is per acre inch of water applied. And this is what I want my yield goal to be. Well, based on water being the only constraint, it comes back to him and says, okay, you can't plant 60 acres of corn with a yield goal of 13,000 pounds and 60 acres of cotton with a yield goal of 1,500 pounds of lint, but you can plant this many acres of corn and this many acres of cotton. You can override that and go back and say, no, I've contracted corn. I've got to plant 60 acres of corn to be able to fulfill a contract. Now, what is a realistic yield goal for my cotton based on the amount of water that I've got left to reach that yield goal on corn? And it solves for that, and then it comes back and solves again for the next most profitable combination of crops. And there may only be a slight difference in total revenue, but there can be a big difference in the amount of water that we're applying. So we're working on that, trying to come up with a tool for producers also. I'm going to stop here and briefly tell you about our implementation phase as far as the slides go. In 2010, our producer board felt like it was time for us to transition into quote-unquote implementation phase. And what that meant to us was the producer board determined that we were going to put a cap of 12 inches of irrigation water applied as a maximum on cotton, 15 inches on corn. We came up with those numbers based on kind of what our average had been over the previous 5 years in the project. We had two producers that stepped up to the plate and said, we're willing to do this. So we added one new producer, Ronnie Aston. Glenn Shure, who's chairman of our producer board, was the other one that volunteered. We worked with a consultant in Plainview named Bob Glott, and Bob does a fantastic job. What we did is he sat down with each one of those growers based on the crops that they wanted to grow and developed a water budget where we would think about when our peak needs were and how were we going to use this limited amount of water and use it to the best. We were very fortunate in 2010. We started the growing season with a full profile. It rained every time we did or didn't need it from then until the end of July. So we were able to hit way below that target as far as applied water is concerned. We plan to do that again in 2011. One of the things that we're going to look at in 2011, we'll have 2 circles of corn. We're going to look at LIPA versus the spray mode all the way through the growing season, and we're going to determine whether we're going to look at that under 40-inch corn, and then we're going to have 20-inch corn. Because we've seen a big shift away from LIPA irrigation to the spray mode, and the only thing we can put our finger on that's causing that is we've got more of our grain producers that are going narrow row and don't want that up and down pattern in their field. But we know early on in the season that LIPA is so much more efficient than our spray mode is, especially with our weather conditions. I'm going to stop right here because I'm out of time. I'd entertain any questions. Thank you.
What crops are they growing under drip? Did you say cotton and corn?
Yes, we've got cotton, corn, and we've actually got side oaks grama that's been grown for seed production, grass seed production. And
do you get a sense that the drip is using less water? Or is it using basically the same amount of water as, say, LIPA or whatever, pivot?
I think if they're managed correctly, that it's LIPA irrigation and drip irrigation are very similar as far as efficiency goes. Now, I may be wrong about that. I know Dr. Porter could address that much better than I can, but if you manage a LIPA system correctly, it's very water efficient.
One would hope that drip would be a little bit better, but I guess it's not going to, for the cost.
Right. And, you know, what we've seen is a big part of the acres that have been put into drip are acres that the fields were not configured where a pivot would really work real well on. There were odd-shaped fields. And, of course, we've seen some of our producers that left their pivot in place and put drip on their corners. Thank y'all.